Greetings from the New Orleans Jazz National Historical Park. The National Park Service is comprised of 419 sites, each one telling their unique part of the American story. Here, we tell the story of America's greatest gift to the world, jazz. At New Orleans Jazz National Historical Park, it is our mission to enhance the understanding and appreciation of jazz music. We accomplish this through workshops, educational programs, and of course, musical performances. Find out more about us on our Facebook page or at our website at www.nps.gov/jazz. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Talkin Jazz with Fred Kasten.
Well, AJ, thanks again for taking time to talk with us. And
of course.
Great to have you here at the virtual sessions of
Yes,
Talkin
indeed.
Jazz. Want to go all the way back to the beginning with you. Where'd you grow up?
I actually grew up in Tampa, Florida. My father's a bass player, and my mother, although not a musician, was always like very encouraging with me and, taking me to lessons when I was really young. And pretty much came up through high school playing gigs, not all the way through high school. The end of my junior year and then into my senior year of high school, I was playing. I had a weekly bar gig, junior and senior year of high school, playing basically. I don't remember the exact time. It was a 9 to midnight or a 9 to 1 thing on a Wednesday night, and my parents were cool enough to sometimes, maybe off the record, let me skip first period on Thursdays if I was a little too tired. Let the record reflect that I did attend those classes though. So, yeah. And then basically after that, I ended up going to Florida State. Did the jazz program there for drums. For what it's worth, on paper, I have a Bachelor of Arts in Jazz Studies. And I finished that from 2008 to 2012. I was in Tallahassee, learning a lot from Leon Anderson, who actually played with Ellis Marsalis, who recently passed. He played with Ellis a whole bunch and ended up teaching the jazz program there at Florida State. And then pretty much immediately after I graduated Florida State, I played my last church gig in Tallahassee. And me and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, we packed up the car and drove straight to our apartment uptown in New Orleans, which we hadn't seen until we actually got into it. We rented it without seeing it. Luckily, it was fantastic. Carrollton was great.
Yeah. So, a long story short, I may get you to lengthen it back on some of the segments here.
All good.
Your dad played bass. What kind of music?
He's kind of a James Jamerson head.
Mm-hmm.
He has an old original 1964 P bass, and he's kind of, a little bit of Rocco Prestia from Tower of Power. He's that kind of guy, very
Right.
rhythmic bass player. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, what was your first instrument? What did you get involved with
Actually, my
first?
first instrument was guitar when I was about 13, 14 years old. I started playing guitar, and then I got a drum set when I was 16 or 17.
So had you been interested in music prior to that, but just hadn't taken anything up?
Oh, of course. I grew up around music. My dad was always playing it around the house, and it just was always the thing that caught my eye. I mean, to this day, people try to talk to me about sports and stuff, and I always tell them, like, man, as soon as I got my first instrument, it was like everything else just went, just got blocked out completely. So.
Guitar at, you say 12, 13 years old?
Yeah, 12, 13, 14, somewhere around there. I can't remember exactly.
And were you, what sparked that particular moment?
I can't remember what it was. I mean, it's I guess it's just one of the more well-known instruments. It's one of the ones that as a kid you can always picture yourself playing, so it just started that way. Most drummers have to have like a chordal instrument. I don't know if I'm getting too musician-y, but most drummers have to have a chordal instrument where they can actually visualize all their music theory. For a lot of drummers, that's piano, but for me, it's guitar. Like whenever I'm writing or I'm thinking about chord progressions, it's always on the fretboard, So
yeah, your architecture is the fretboard instead of the keyboard.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how long stick with just guitar, and what kind of things were you listening to around the time you started playing, or were you trying to play some of the stuff you heard?
Yeah, a lot of it was like Allman Brothers stuff. You know, I
Hmm.
was really into Greg and Dwayne Allman. Although I didn't have a slide, I couldn't really. It's just something that I always had the mechanics for, but I never really got to a point where I could like speak through it. You know, and I had a lot of great guitar player friends of mine that were my same age and just had a voice on it. You know, they had something to say. So
Right.
it eventually just became more and more apparent that I wanted to play drums. You know, so yeah.
Had that been an interest of yours even well before that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, sound in general has always been a thing with me. Like I've always, you know, I tell drummers that ask me this all the time, like who were your favorite drummers growing up? And I didn't actually have a lot of favorite drummers growing up. I just had favorite like albums. I had favorite
Right.
drum sounds and songs and stuff like that when I was really young. And that's what's informed my playing more than like, oh, Steve Gadd, I got it, you know.
Right. Right.
You know?
Yeah, good as Gad might be. Right.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. I know. Yeah, it's so I've never been like the drummer head. It's just been, you know, sounds from like
uh,
early Emerson, Lake and Palmer records and stuff like that. It's just caught
well,
my ear when I was really little. You know.
probably indications or foreshadowing of your interest as a producer
Absolutely,
and a
absolutely.
beat maker.
Yeah, yeah. Because me and my dad would always listen to music in the car, and he would, even at a really young age, he would like point out certain things in the mix to me. You
Right.
know, and that's always, you know, that software got downloaded on my hard drive very early on. So I've always been a detail guy. You know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
AJ, when you were playing guitar around the time you switched to drums, were
Yeah.
you uh, that was a little before you got the bar gig, or what were you playing on that bar
Um,
gig you had?
the
Drums?
bar gig was just me. It was just me and a guitar player. I don't know how it sounded, but we managed to make it because it was my friend, one of my greatest friends ever. His name's Matt Walker. He was playing on an acoustic, and I was playing like a sort of a jazz style bass drum with a really open sound, and I was playing with brushes. So we actually managed to occupy a pretty big, like fluffy kind of space for just the two of us. You know.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And that was what nights of the week were you?
Yeah, it was. I think it was a Wednesday night. It might have switched because we did it for like a year and a half. It might have
Okay.
switched at some point, but it was mostly a Wednesday night,
Was
and we were
that
out
like
there.
an Ybor City club or something?
Yeah, almost Ybor, more in like below the actual Tampa area in the suburbs, you know.
Oh,
And we were there, but I mean, allegedly not able to get in the door, you know.
had to slip you in, slide
Yeah,
you
exactly.
in.
Yeah. Well, luckily, you know, it was like a patio gig. It was out
Oh,
back,
oh,
so I
okay.
guess it wasn't technically in the bar, you
And
know.
what kind of material were you guys playing there?
Just regular bar cover gigs. We're playing Pink Floyd and stuff like that. Stuff that regular bar goers want to hear. But we would slip in stuff that we wanted to play every once. You know, we would like play James Brown songs, or
Hmm.
Matt's really into like Leon Redbone and Bob Dylan and all the troubadour kind of guys.
Right.
So we would play some of that stuff, and we would get into the funk stuff. But without a real bass player, you can't. There's only so far you can go.
Right,
You
right. Well, were you, speaking of the word right, different spelling, were you
Yeah.
writing at all? Were you starting to get interested in composing at that point?
Honestly, I mean, the composing thing didn't happen until later. I really, fast forward to like 3 years ago was when I really started to take the beat making and producing thing seriously. I had always been doing it. I'd always been making beats when I had access to somebody else's equipment, and I had always been producing when I found myself in a session or a band where there was no real head of the ship, and I just sort of said, "Hey, well, why don't you do this, and why don't we?" You know what I mean? And I never really started to make that. I never really started to make that the like from the jump situation until about 3-4 years ago, and that's when I really started to just zone in on it. So, yeah.
When you switched to drums, were you getting some private instruction, or you just self-taught?
A little bit, yeah. I had a little bit of private instruction, and people always ask me about the open-handed playing that I do. And that actually started out as a mistake, because when I got my first drum set, I just sat down and started doing whatever I felt should be happening, and I ended up playing with this weird open-handed style. It's like left-handed but right-footed. So that happened for about a year, And then I started taking lessons just because I felt like I should, somebody needs to be telling me something about what I'm doing. Can't just be in a vacuum. So I started taking lessons, and by that time it was way too late to switch to an actual crossover,
Right.
So yeah.
So, and who'd you get to work with?
It was a local guy around here. His name was Dave Rudolph, actually. I think he still teaches around in Tampa, actually.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he still teaches down in Tampa. And, we just talked about the basic fundamentals of stuff. There was all kinds of technique things that I had completely all wrong and everything like that. But it ended up being good because I had a natural ear before I had a technical brain for anything, which is, I think is how every musician should come up. You should figure out what you want to sound like first, and then let an instructor sort of hone that in for you.
Yeah, I think I'd say 95% of the jazz artists I've talked to have concurred that the best way to learn jazz is to listen to it.
Yep. And that's going to Florida State. I got my first straight ahead record 2 weeks before I started college. But Leon heard me play, and he kind of heard just a natural ability for me to adapt to things, even though it was probably very clear back then that I hadn't played that much of that style. Right. But he just heard that I was able to adapt, so I definitely had to learn how to listen to that stuff. And once I did, it's like Pandora's box,
Was there ever a point where you sort of consciously made a decision to pursue music, or by the time you were in, say, a senior in high school, did that just look like the way to go?
Yeah, I think it kind of took off that way once I, because I was making pretty decent money for a 17-year-old, 18-year-old without a day job. I was, it was just two people playing a bar gig for 4 hours. You come away with what, $250, sometimes more, sometimes less. So it was pretty apparent that it was pretty apparent to me that I had a skill at it, that I was passionate about it. And, I got the offer to come to Florida State, and it just took off from there. I never really looked back.
Did you sing in that band?
Yeah. It was me and Matt singing, kind of harmonies or back and forth based on who knew what song,
What about bass? Had you had the guitar to sort of build up, begin to understand what was going on with that? When did you start playing bass?
I was always around my father's bass. So I think I tried playing my dad's bass even before I had a guitar, So I always had kind of an idea of how to get around the fretboard on a bass, that's kind of been on and off, and it didn't really pick up like that until college, back to playing a couple of bar gigs, and I was actually playing a few bar gigs here and there on bass. So it's always been this revolving door kind of,
Right. Like it keeps it fresh.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's Tony Bennett told me that's what Duke Ellington told him, his best advice. He said he goes, always have two things.
Oh, wow.
And so for Bennett, it was painting as well as singing.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Man, I would love to see the two of them talk.
Oh, man, fly on that wall. Yeah. So you get to Florida State. You're beginning then to do some, probably have to, very serious listening to
Sure.
The repertoire.
And at first, with most straight ahead, I didn't get it at all. I didn't know that there were forms in tunes. I didn't know that there was chord progressions. I didn't know. First time I heard a recording of a drummer and a soloist trading, 4 bars drums, 4 bars trumpet, 4 bars. I had no idea what was happening, and all I knew at the time listening to it for the first time was like, this is 5 minutes into the recording. How do they know to do that? Did they rehearse 5 minutes worth of material? And then, I had no idea, but I think that such a primitive understanding of it at an older age, when I was 18, 19, I think such a primitive understanding of it actually helped me, get into that music and sort of fall in love with that music even more than a lot of kids who were like taught from 11, 12 years old, this is what Sonny Rollins sounds like, like you're 12 years old. You're only going to understand like a very surface level of what's happening there,
Yeah, you've got a little more fluency maybe on the instrument, and you're
Sure.
not, but you're not. You have no preformed conceptions about it.
Exactly, exactly. Like I already knew how to play drums well. I just needed to get the touch and get the language and just understand how that style of music worked on the instrument that I could already play. You know,
Was
which
there ever a moment when you kind of the veil lifted almost suddenly, or was it a slow process?
yeah, there. I mean, there was so freshman year it was complete, just what you know D-Day on Normandy Beach. I guess just complete like just no idea what's happening. I'm here.
Just trying to stay alive,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I'm at school. I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
I'm working on ride cymbal playing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm playing the bass drum way too hard. Just complete complete catastrophe. And then the summer of freshman year, I finally started to dial in on it, and I found like a cut of stick that I really really liked, and I went back home to Tampa during the summer of my freshman year in college and really started to zone in on just transcribing other drummers and like Arthur Taylor and Jimmy Cobb and different recordings. And then that summer, my ear really opened up to like listening to Philly Joe Jones comping behind Miles or Train in the 50s. My ear really started to open up like, oh, when Train ends a phrase, like Philly Joe plays a little something, and then, you know what I mean? The whole conversational aspect of it really opened up, and that's when my sound changed and everything. So I came back sophomore year, and there was a lot of people at Florida State that thought I was a different like kid. Like they literally thought, because I had grown a little bit more facial hair at the time. A couple people literally thought like, are you were here last year? Was that you? Like it literally, so it completely switched, and it was all just because my ear opened up,
Ran a ringer in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, well, I know that I think I read that Jameson Ross was there the first 2 years.
Yeah, my first 2 years was his last 2 years. Yeah. So we kind of connected early on, and he'll probably tell you too. Like I was very, young age-wise and musically. I was just very naive and young, and I had no idea what was going on. But Jameson, even back then, Jameson knew too. Like there was an ear that I had for music. It just hadn't been in tune with that particular music yet.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, you started getting there once you began to sort of be able to decode the language. Were you starting to have some fun then?
Yeah, absolutely. Then it became like, let's play. Can we get up and play? Who's around? Let's play. Let's go. It didn't matter if it was a gig in the rehearsal room. It was like, let's talk. Like
right.
When you learn Spanish, all you want to do is get around people that can speak Spanish.
Right.
So that's kind of what sophomore year and basically the rest of college was from. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned playing some bar gigs. Were there other performance opportunities at Florida State?
Yeah, Florida State has a really, really good. It's one of the. I'm assuming it's still the case, but at the time it was one of the. It was widely known as like the most swinging school in the South, and probably the country, because the UNT thing is completely its own thing, but it's not swing largely,
Right.
Like at Florida State, they kind of start you from the 50s and then you go up, whereas other quote unquote jazz schools, they kind of let you deal with the 60s a little bit, and then you go up to the 70s, and then you immediately start dealing with like Ambrose and Robert Glasper and all that. It's like, okay,
right.
There's,
okay.
you know what I mean? There's a lot that happened in between those guys,
Right.
So there was a lot of opportunities to just get up and talk about music with the professors. It was very, very candid with a lot of them. You could get up and play, and you just call tunes, like you do on a straight ahead gig anytime. On a less formal straight ahead gig, you just get up, call tunes. There was a great club in Tallahassee called B Sharps, and they would have some of the student groups come in there and play. And yeah, it was just a scene, Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that after completing schooling, it was like, and playing one final church gig, you got in the car and drove here. Had you begun to get some experience, or was say Jason Marcellus a part of the teaching?
Yeah. So Jason, I had worked with Jason actually quite a bit junior and sophomore year of college, because he would come down, him and Roland Guerin for a while, and then Rodney Jordan, the bass professor at Florida State, is actually, you know, in that mix with the Marcus Roberts trio. Marcus Roberts is a professor adjunct, you know, at Florida State. So me and a bunch of my friends would just go in his office and just soak up all the knowledge we could. And Jason would be there a lot, and I developed a lot of my taste for how I like to solo and how I like to think when I'm playing from the way that Jason plays, you know, and it just became more and more and more apparent that New Orleans was the place to go, you know.
Did you actually get to come here some?
A few times. I think like only a handful, like 3 or 4 before, you know, maybe twice before I decided I was going to go. And then probably 2 or 3 more times after I knew I was going to go, just to, you know, get a feel for everything. Yeah.
Right. So you land in town. You got an apartment here in my neighborhood, Carrollton.
Yeah, Carrollton. Yeah.
And what happened, man? Did it turn out to be as welcoming as you hoped it would be?
Yeah. It absolutely did. It was at a good time when there's I mean, for those who don't know, there's the influx. The Florida State to New Orleans pipeline is right. Massive. It's ridiculous how many of us have come from Florida State and just ended up there. They're still coming, still getting off the boat, you know. It's like there's still right. Students that just get led to New Orleans. I think through Leon Anderson, the drum instructor and head of the program there. It was great when I first landed there. I was doing church gigs, playing gospel music in Baptist or like, you know, Pentecostal churches. Some straight ahead gigs, some funk gigs, and that's the beautiful thing about New Orleans is there's no divide, you know.
Right.
That was one of the things that was really apparent even before I moved there, that you can just if you can play it, you're in that mix, you know. So it's good. It was great.
Yeah. I was just thinking, you know, years ago there was a pretty good contingent from St. Louis, Peter Martin and Chris Thomas and Jeremy Davenport and Tom McDermott and a few others, but I think Tallahassee has it beat by a long shot now.
Yeah, it's weird. You know, Barry Stevenson, Jameson Ross. I mean, you know,
Ricardo Pascal.
Yeah, Ricardo, Emily with the New Orleans Jazz Orchestra, Riccio too. Like there's a massive pipeline.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's
been a good influx, I think, for the New Orleans scene too. A lot of terrific players have come here as a result.
Yeah, I mean we're honored to be there because it's, I mean, you know, the legacy runs so deep as it is. We're just happy to get in there and be able to participate and contribute our little thing to it, you know. What
was your first sort of steady gig, AJ, when you?
I mean, it actually was the Gregory Ajeet gig, because it's at the time Darian Douglas. When I moved there, it was right when when I moved to New Orleans, it was right as Darian was on his way out and about to go up to New York. I think me and Darian were in town for about 3 months at the same time, and Darian shot right up to New York. So I started playing the Greg gig at the Maison on Tuesdays, like, you know, pretty much 3-4 months in. Right
there, yeah. Yeah, and that was a great introduction because he's a guy who could introduce you to other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. At the time, Josh Starkman was playing the gig too. Another Florida State guy. You know, it's like pipeline.
Yeah. So you immediately felt at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Not just for those reasons, but for a lot of reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Musically and just culturally, it is, you know, where I want to be, you know.
Well, what about the hip hop scene here? Were you familiar with that at all when you?
Honestly, not that much. I mean, I kind of my injection into the whole hip hop scene with my band. I did it with my band pretty early on, just because I wanted to have a band that could play. I wanted to have a band full of musicians that understood how to play that music. Because once again, it's a language, you know, and with hip hop, it's a lot of discipline, because you have to be really disciplined, that even though you may be playing the same part getting bored, there's a whole story happening in front of you. You know, you got to let them tell that story. So, you know, I just wanted to have a band that was comfortable enough with me sort of leading them and knew what they were doing, like sound wise, and just crafting sounds and backing up an MC. So that happened with Nesby Phipps pretty early on, like 2015 into 2016. And me actually making beats for some of the New Orleans rappers didn't happen until like about a year and a half ago, kind of end of 2018, and then all through 2019 was the big spree of that, you know.
When did you first move to New Orleans? What year?
2012.
In 12.
Yeah.
So you kind of soaked up a lot of things before you really got into the hip hop community.
Yeah, absolutely. I had already been pretty active in the live music scene, and you know, touring with John Cleary put me in sort of a weird position because, and a lot of cats who have road gigs will attest to this. When you get into a local scene, you're playing a lot, you got 4 or 5 gigs a week, you're really doing it, and then you get a road gig where all of a sudden the same guy calls you for the same gig 4 weeks in a row, and you're probably not going to have that gig the 5th week, you know.
Right. He's not going to burn a phone call, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when he needs somebody like in an hour, they're not going to call the guy who's probably on the road.
Yes.
So it put me in a position to sort of take my production and my beat making more seriously, because I had a lot more free time, you know. And
when you're back home off of
exactly,
tour,
yeah, right? And on the road, it's a great way to pass time.
Oh, right, yeah, because you can take everything with you. So
yeah, I mean, people,
so
you know, people complain about being bored on the road, and it's like, man, it's 2020. We have everything at our disposal. You know, there's no excuse for being bored on the road anymore.
Yes, yeah, right. It's as the old saying goes, a failure of inner resources.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, man.
Well,
so yeah, making beats came along fairly recently, you know.
Yeah. When did you start working with John, and how did you meet Brother Cleary?
John Cleary.
Yeah.
Basically, I had back up to, I think 2010, 2011. No, 2011. 2011. There's a festival down in Tampa. Clearwater, which is west of Tampa. There's a festival down there called the Clearwater Jazz Holiday, and it's a yearly festival that's free, that my parents had been taking me to since I was real little. I saw Tito Puente when he was still alive. We saw a lot of different people come through that festival when I was growing up. And in 2011, John Cleary and the Absolute Monster Gentlemen came to the Clearwater Jazz Holiday, and we saw them, and it was the perfect delivery. Because before, John was scheduled to close out the night of that festival, right? So the band on before them was this German sort of psychedelic. It was progressive jazz, but it was also mixed with sort of drum and bass elements. It was real heady, crazy, and it's a big old festival stage where people wanted to hang out and have a good time. So it was cool at first, and then you could feel the entire audience just like, all right. But, you know, you could feel them getting pretty bored. And then John Cleary came on, and nobody down there had known him that well. You know, John Cleary came on and opened up with So Damn Good, and then played, I think, When You Get Back or something else off of that album. And you felt the whole place just go, oh, whoa, you know what I mean? So after that, my parents bought all of his CDs that he had out at the time, and those stayed in my car when I was driving around all throughout high school. So fast forward to 2016, Jameson Ross, again, Florida State connection. Jameson Ross actually was playing with John quite a bit, and this is at the same time that Jameson's solo career was starting to take off a lot. You know, this is the time that his career was skyrocketing, you know, and he unfortunately wasn't able to make a lot of John's gigs that he was playing, that he was scheduled to make. So it was, John kind of needed somebody to step in, and because I had known Jameson so well, you know, he kind of recommended me for one of the gigs, and John's way of testing me out was just sort of throwing me in the fire like a cold run. He said, come play the Maple Leaf. This is when John was doing Mondays at the Maple Leaf with the gents, with Big D and Cornell. So, you know, I think John's idea was like, you know, screw it. Let's see what he sounds like. No rehearsal, nothing. And this is all the AMG's repertoire, right? This is their arrangements, all of it, right? So I show up on a Monday night at the Maple Leaf, no rehearsal, and you could tell with Big D and Cornell and John, it was like, all right, well, let's see how this goes because we have arrangements and all this stuff. Meanwhile, I've been listening to John's stuff since I'm 17, 16, right. 17, 18, all throughout college too, you know. So I came and there was not one song that I didn't know, you know. I know all the hits, all the arrangements and everything like that. So it just I kind of became a member of John's band almost after that night. I think there was a couple more gigs before he made it official, but yeah, that's how it happened.
Yeah. So that listening experience.
Listening. Man. Yep. You got to learn it. Got to learn the language. Yep.
And they do a lot of stops and some pretty fancy rhythm change. I mean, meter changes and
yeah. And you know, it's since I've been playing with John since 2016. Me and Cornell have developed our little audible plays that we do behind John, and you know, we got it ever evolving. You know.
Yeah. So, well, that's a great trio, man. That must be tremendous fun to work with us.
I've never had a bad gig with John. We've had weird gigs based on the audience, but I've never had a bad gig with him. Yeah. Like musically, it's never been off, you know, because you know, the three of us just have that connection based on what we all like and what we all listen to. Right. And there's stuff that I listen to that I'm sure John doesn't care for, but it doesn't matter because when we're playing as a trio, like we're all accessing the same, you know, we're all referencing the same music and trying to get the same point across. So.
Yeah, one of the things about his playing as he's developed over the years, I've really enjoyed is the Cuban influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that me and him related to really early on, and when I started playing with him too, because I've always been interested in that music. Jimmy Brantley is one of my favorite drummers. He played with Enahela Banda back in the day. Right. He's always been one of my favorite guys and influences, and, you know. So, yeah.
Yeah, that with any luck in a few years, we'll all be able to experience a lot more interaction with the Cuban musical community because there's always been tremendous interplay between New Orleans and Cuba and between New Orleans and Jamaica.
Yep. That's the one that's the one that's even more on the slick than the Cuban relationship is the Jamaican relationship. That's the one that's really a deep cut, you know. But yeah, it's always there. You listen to any Meters recording, especially any Neville Brothers recording, and it's right. It's right in front of your face. But if you don't know what it is, you don't necessarily think that it's Cuban or, you know, South Caribbean. You think it's just New Orleans, you know. But if you hear any early song music or any early salsa music, and then you listen to Neville Brothers, you're like, oh, it's right there, you know.
Yeah, Monty Alexander told me when he was a kid in Kingston that they could pick up AM New Orleans AM stations at night, and so they listened to Fats Domino and you know, Roy Brown and all that stuff. It had tremendous influence. In fact, John Cleary does a great lecture on the clave and second line, the connections.
That one that's on YouTube where he's playing piano.
Yeah, I've heard him do several versions of that over the years, but it's really interesting following that back and how that works, how those influences work together.
He's a knowledgeable cat, man. There's nothing about New Orleans that he doesn't know, you know.
He really dug in once he got here, and he had been before he got here.
Yeah, he did not waste any time.
No, once he got his immigration status resolved, that was a battle for a number of years. But
yeah, he's told me. I'm sure he has even more stories that I don't even know about, but the stories about him being in and out of the immigration jail and everything. It's like, oh God, man.
Oh, it was terrible, man. Yeah, terrible. I'm glad he didn't come of age in this era. Let me put it that way.
Man. I mean, yeah, he really earned his New Orleans citizenship. Like, in more ways than one.
In more ways than one, right. Well, we're kind of clocking down here, but I wanted to talk to you about the Grid. Is that active? What's going on with that?
It's active. I mean, it's about as active as anybody else's band is right now. You know. We before this whole thing hit, we actually got up in my home studio and just pretty much set out to record an instrumental album, and that's what we ended up doing. We got 21 sort of sketches that are I'm going to mess with in Pro Tools and sort of reproduce off of what we played. It's basically going to be like a beat tape, like somebody like Jay Dilla would send out beat tapes back in the 90s. He would just send them to rappers, like, here's some instrumentals, you do what you want, you know. And that kind of informed how people release beat tapes today. They release beat tapes as their own listening platform. You know, it's like, this is a body of work. It's done. It's not something to be built upon. Like, this is the record, you know. So I'm working on getting that out and getting it mixed and mastered. I do all of it myself. So although it's less expensive to do it yourself, it takes a long time to do it yourself. So,
right.
You know,
Pro Tools, is that
Pro Tools and Logic? Pro Tools is good for editing, but Logic allows you to be more creative. You know,
so you make use of both of those.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Who all is in? Who are the gritters?
It is John Maestas,
guitarist.
Yeah, sorry, guitar John Maestas, bass Max Moran, the town bass player, you know, and Jay Winfield, who plays keys with Mikea Jovan and the Brassaholics and Noah Young's band sometimes. You know, he's another like heavy cat around the scene. So yeah.
And what kind you just come up with sketches, or how do you work in terms of developing the material, AJ?
It's kind of sketches. Like the way we did it with this particular recording session that we did, I sent them about 3 weeks before we got up to record. I sent them all a playlist of like some of my favorite just beats of all time from different eras, some from the 90s, some from the mid 2000s, some from the late 2010s, some from 2019. You know, I just sent them a big playlist and I said, you don't have to learn these. Just, I want to see what catches your ear, and then let's get up. And it basically just, each tune started out with me playing a groove, and kind of like, you ever heard of the Everything Orchestra?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was kind of that concept. You know, we just got up, somebody would play something, and somebody has their input on what Jay's playing on keys, and they say, why don't we move that up a half step? Why don't we make that a major 7 chord instead of just a triad? You know, so every tune kind of formulated on that way. If you look at the actual session file, you see a bunch of waveforms and then nothing, bunch of waveforms and then nothing,
right.
The waveforms, and then long waveform, because that's when we figured out what we wanted it to be. You know, so It's a lot of compositions on the spot. You know. And I really enjoyed that process.
Do you think that that doing that kind of work maybe helps with your live improvisational skills?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it helps you pay attention to what you're really playing. You can, you know, when you're making up compositions on the spot, you can't be on autopilot. You know,
no cliches involved in
exactly.
instant composition.
Yeah,
or at least you try to avoid them anyway.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has their cliches that they think they're avoiding. It. You know?
Yeah, no, you did it again.
No, like we still know it's you. Yeah.
Well, what in this time you've alluded to this, but have you had a chance to do some more of these producer type things?
Well, I mean, I've honestly been making beats a lot. I have drum break sample packs that I make that are available. They're available on my website. Each pack has 50 drum breaks in it. They're all recorded and produced by me. They're meant to sound like, you know, old James Brown drum breaks or stacked drum breaks, kind of crunchy and compressed and stuff like that. I just found that a lot of hip hop producers, you know, a lot of famous hip hop producers are using the same couple of drum breaks. You know, the Funky Drummer drum break from James Brown, the Bill Withers Use Me drum break, right in that little spot where it's just Bill and the drummer. You know, everybody's using these same breaks, and I'm like, man, I can recreate these, and I know how to mix and record drums to sound real gritty like that. So that's what I've honestly been spending a lot of my quarantine time getting together, making these drum breaks happen. And working on probably the second record with Gene Stanza. We put out an album called Undeniable together. It's 18 tracks. It's all recorded, produced, and mixed and mastered by me. He's rapping over it, and I'm really happy with it. So we've been kind of, you know, doing the Dropbox thing back and forth, right. You know.
All right, yeah.
And other than that, just watching my daughter, because all the schools are shut down right now. my wife's still working, so I'm kind of on daddy duty during the day a lot.
Well, that keep you pretty busy right there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, it's I'm not really mad about it. It's definitely the most time I've spent with my daughter since she was born.
Yeah, I'd say for sure it's the most yard work I've ever seen done in New Orleans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
every yard pristine,
pristine, man. Edging, all that. People